this post, I'd like to introduce what I think to be a very useful doctrine in our current comparative study. Known as the Transendant Unity of Religions, which tends to indeed fit well with a panentheistic and or process metaphysic, and a non-dual doctrine as well. Of course, this doctrine is not exclusivist, and there's a very good reason why. It is more of from a pluralist and more inclusive perspective concerning the world's main spiritual traditions. And a precautionary note here, there is a doctrine within the scheme of evangelical eschatology that is set itself up against a doctrine of unity of world religions. And because of its presumptuous eschatological scheme, many have confused the doctrine of the Transcendant Unity of Religions and productive interfaith dialogue with what they see as an approaching New World Order under the forced worship of a one-world religion. So they confuse one for the other oftentimes because of that counter doctrine within the evangelical scheme of premillennial dispensationalism and the rise of what they consider to be an antichrist that would rule under a one-world religion. So that's what they believe, and I suppose because that is their belief, it to an extent is understandable why they would think that. But this particular back cover book report will clear up the issue and present a clear and concise demarcation between what people consider to be an amalgamation of world religion under an antichrist figure, a new world order, so to speak, or a one world religion, and that of the doctrine of the Transcendent Unity of Religions, which is completely and utterly different. But for some reason, because of the counter doctrine within exotericism, they vehemently oppose any such ecumenical behavior. So, what if truth was scattered into many variations and forms? What if the 5 most prominent religions or spiritual traditions in the world are various expressions of one truth? There's a very useful doctrine in interreligious correlational theology known as the Transendant Unity of Religions. Frijoth Schuon, in his well-researched work, brings forth an adequate introduction to this doctrine. So what is the 5 major spiritual traditions, what if they were in God's hands and not, as so many are taught to assume, satanic? We'd come up with a theology similar to what this doctrine expresses. It is the Transendant Unity of Religions. So a little research goes a long way. And this is from one of my Facebook posts. This is what I posted. There is unfortunately a blurring of the line, demarcating what many evangelicals view as a conglomeration attempting to construct a new world order and a one world religion under a coming Antichrist figure, and the theology and doctrine of the Transcendent Unity of Religions. Many people have confused these as one and the same, or one for the other, effectively building up a wall against any form of productive interfaith dialogue. Many people have confused these. Here is a quick meta AI overview concerning the main difference between the two worldviews that people confuse one for the other. There's a differentiation between the two concepts. One world religion, New World Order, implies a single, unified religious system imposed globally, forced, often associated with a totalitarian or authoritarian control. And you can see an artistic expression of that idea within what has been called left behind theology, based on the series of books and films. And now we're continuing with our description of what a one world religion would be. Seeks to eliminate diversity and individuality in religious beliefs. I would add here that religious or Christian, Jewish, Islamic exclusivism of any sort also seeks to eliminate diversity and individuality in religious beliefs. So those two things are common. So exclusivist ideas. And it can be seen as a forced external unity, may involve a watered down or syncretized version of different religions. So that's a rough idea, according to Meta AI, what a one world or new world order religion would look like. Now, the other worldview, Transcendent Unity of Religions, refers to a deeper spiritual unity that transcends external differences. So my guess is it would be solely in the spirit. Recognizes the diversity of religious traditions and beliefs, seeks to find common ground and shared values among religions, encourages mutual respect, understanding, and cooperation. Involves a voluntary internal unity that honors individuality and diversity. The first concept implies a forced external unity, whereas the second concept involves a voluntary internal unity that respects diversity or variation. Transcendent Unity of Religions is often associated with interfaith dialogue, spiritual ecumenism, and the recognition of a shared human spirituality. So it does not dehumanize, as we often see, unfortunately. It doesn't demonize other spiritual traditions. It's co-relational, interreligious. Of course, one has to have the ability to think across traditions, to see the uniqueness as well as the unmistakable similarities between the spiritual traditions that often speak in many ways the same symbolic language. Frijoth Schuon, the Transendant Unity of Religions, asserts that to transcend religious differences, we must explore the esoteric nature of the spiritual path, back to the divine oneness at the heart of all religions. Esoteric meaning few, specialized, inner, hidden. And this term is often used, unfortunately, hand in hand with the word occult, which they basically have the same meaning. They're just utilized in different ways. So esoteric nature of the spiritual path is what this transcendent term, or transcendent unity of religions, is referring to. So exotericism, on the other hand, is counterintuitive to esotericism, vice versa. So this may explain the backlash that esoteric Christians, for instance, receive from their exoteric brothers and sisters. While esotericism is more universal in nature, and exotericism is more exclusivist and particular in nature. That's one major difference. In my opinion, I would say you can't really have one without the other. And I think people are waking up to realize that fact. This divine oneness at the heart of all religions, unitive consciousness, must be acquired. And it must not be confused with a mishmash of various religious traditions known as syncretism and doctrines known as such, which is often recognized within the New Age movement. The author makes this distinction. Esoteric Christianity and Christian mysticism, for that matter, are often put under the umbrella term of New Age, because exotericists seem to confuse the two, because the New Age movement actually is a syncretized religion. The author, Frijoth Schuon, makes this distinction because many people confuse unity consciousness with a postmodernism and globalist agenda, i.e. New World Order, which is but the shadow side of the true unity consciousness, a unity based on power rather than cognizance and true spiritual meaning and enlightenment. These should never be confused, for one is based in Christ consciousness and the other is pseudo-enlightenment, false illumination, Luciferian, and Antichrist at its core. So, within a non-dual panentheistic metaphysical perspective, as well as that of a pluralist, inclusivist perspective concerning the world's spiritual traditions, this doctrine becomes quite a useful tool in conceptualizing how people can say all is one. At the transcendent level, that's how. With the mind ill-prepared to transcend its own ego, perhaps would find a doctrine like this not so useful. And now for the back cover, Transendant Unity of Religions by Frijoth Schuon. Quote, one of the 100 best spiritual books of the 20th century. The Transcendent Unity of Religions is a testimony to life as a holistic and sacred phenomenon. Every religion can be linked to a ray of light emanating from the divine source, says Frijoth Schuon, the great Swiss comparative religionists. And I must say he is also a well-rounded metaphysician in his perspective. And I would say that the Transcendent Unity of Religions doctrine could be well characterized as a metaphysical theology because it includes philosophy and science within its scope, more so than it excludes them. Food for thought. The great Swiss comparative religionist, to transcend religious differences, he explains we must explore the esoteric, or rather veiled, obscured, hidden nature of the inward turned spiritual path. On this journey, we can trace the brilliant ray of illumination back to the divine oneness that is the basis of all religions. Superlative, the most powerful statement of the grand or better primordial tradition. It is original in incorporating what our age for the first time demands, that religion be treated in global terms. Houston Smith. I've met with no more impressive work in the comparative study of Oriental and Occidental religion. T.S. Eliot. Perhaps the most provocative theory to explain and maintain the unity and diversity of religion. It makes more sense than any other with which I am acquainted. Joseph Catthill, Chairperson, Department of Religious Studies, University of Alberta. A profound and demanding book, rather astounding. Neither an easy universal mysticism, nor a new dogma, but a fresh way of looking at spiritual reality. Frijoth Schuon, 1907 to 1998, is acclaimed as the greatest authority on comparative religions of the 20th century. His many books include into the Face of the Absolute, 1989. The Feathered Sun, Plains Indians in Art and Philosophy, 1990. And To Have a Center, a world traveler during the time Schuon studied the religion of the Plains Indians. He was officially adopted into the Sioux Nation. Now I'd like to put forth an idea, and by doing so I'm going to read a section from, or a paragraph or two from this great work, this great small book. And this shows, or he implies or attempts to show, how the doctrine of religious or spiritual exclusivism is metaphysically an impossibility. At least this is what he deduces from the last statement. So I'm going to read a quote from page 18. Quote, "The exoteric claim to the exclusive possession of a unique truth, or of truth without epithet, is therefore an error purely and simply. In reality, every expressed truth necessarily assumes a form." And I'd add here, I like to always say that there are many forms and one God. Worship God and not the form. Continuing, that of its expression, and it is a metaphysically impossible that any form should possess a unique value to the exclusion of other forms. For a form, by definition, cannot be unique and exclusive. That is to say, it cannot be the only possible expression of what it expresses. Form implies specification or distinction, and the specific is only conceivable as a modality of a species, that is to say, of a category that includes a combination of analogous modalities. Again, that which is limited excludes by definition whatever is not comprised within its own limits, and must compensate for this exclusion by reaffirmation of repetition of itself outside its own boundaries, which amounts to saying that the existence of other limited things is rigorously implied in the very definition to the limited. To claim that a limitation, for example, a form considered as such, is unique and incomparable of its kind, and that it excludes the existence of other analogous modalities, is to attribute to it the unicity of existence itself. Now, no one can contest the fact that a form is always a limitation, or that a religion is of necessity always a form. Not that goes without saying, by virtue of its internal truth, which is of a universal and supra-formal order, but because of its mode of expression, which as such cannot but be formal, and therefore specific and limited, It can never be said too often that a form is always a modality of a category of formal and therefore distinctive or multiple manifestation. It is consequently but one modality among others that are equally possible. Their supra-formal cause alone being unique, we will also repeat, for this is metaphysically of great importance, that a form, by the very fact that it is limited, necessarily leaves something out itself, namely that which its limits exclude. This something, if it belongs to the same order, is necessarily analogous to the form under consideration. Since the distinction between forms must needs be compensated by an indistinction or relative identity that prevents them from being absolutely distinct from each other. For that would entail the absurd idea of a plurality of unifications or existences, each form representing a sort of divinity without any relationship to other forms. As we have just seen, the exoteric claim to the exclusive possession of the truth comes up against the axiomatic objection that there is no such thing in existence as a unique fact. For this simple reason that it is strictly impossible that such a fact should exist. Unification alone being unique, and no fact being unicity, it is this that is ignored by the ideology of the quote-unquote believers, which is fundamentally nothing but an intentional and interested confusion between the formal and the universal. The ideas that are affirmed in one religious form, as for example, the idea of the word, or logos, or of the divine unity, cannot fail to be affirmed in one way or another in all other religious forms. Similarly, the means of grace or spiritual realization at the disposal of one priestly order cannot but possess their equivalent elsewhere, and indeed, more important and indispensable any particular means of grace may be, the more certain is it that it will be found in all the orthodox forms, in a mode appropriate to the environment in question. The foregoing can be summed up in the following. In the following formula, pure and absolute truth can only be found beyond all its possible expressions. These expressions, as such, cannot claim the attributes of this truth. Their relative remoteness from it is expressed by their differentiation and multiplicity, by which they are strictly limited. The metaphysical impossibility of the exclusive possession of the truth by any doctrinal form whatsoever can also be expressed in the following manner. Adopting a cosmological viewpoint that can be translated without difficulty into religious language, that God should have permitted the decay and consequent decline of a certain civilizations, and having granted them several thousand years of spiritual prosperity is in no way in contradiction with the nature of God. If one may so express oneself likewise, that the whole of humanity should have entered into a relatively short period of obscuration after thousands of years of sane and balanced existence is again in conformity with God's manner of acting. On the other hand, to suppose that God, while desiring the well-being of humanity, should have seen fit to leave the vast majority of men, including the most gifted, to stagnate for thousands of years, practically without hope, in the darkness of moral ignorance, that in wishing to save the human race, he should have seen fit to choose a means so materially and psychologically ineffective as a new religion that, long before it could be brought to the notice of all mankind, had not only acquired an increasingly particularized and local character, but was even, by force of circumstances, partially corrupted in its original environment. To suppose that God could act in such a manner is highly presumptuous and flagrantly contradicts the nature of God, the essence of which is goodness and mercy. This nature, as theology is far from being unaware, can be terrible, but not monstrous. Again, that God should have allowed human blindness to create heresies within traditional civilization is in conformity with the divine laws that govern the whole of creation, but that God could have allowed a religion that was merely the invention of a man to conquer a part of humanity and to maintain itself for more than 1,000 years in a quarter of the inhabited world, thus betraying the love, faith, and hope of a multitude of sincere and fervent souls. This again is contrary to the laws of the divine mercy, or in other words, to those of universal possibility. The redemption is an eternal act that cannot be situated in either space or time, and the sacrifice of Christ is a particular manifestation or realization of it on the human plane. Men were able to benefit from the redemption as well before the coming of Jesus Christ as after it, and outside the visible church as well as within it. If Christ had been the only manifestation of the Word, supposing such a uniqueness of manifestation to be possible, the effect of his birth would have been the instantaneous reduction of the universe to ashes. End quote. So, the metaphysical impossibility of the exclusive possession of the truth by any doctrinal form whatsoever is impossible, metaphysically speaking. So, the Transendant Unity of Religions, introduction by Houston Smith, author Frijoth Schuon, metaphysicist, comparative religionist, and in my estimation, a genius. So not much more can be said about this great work, about his various works actually. I would definitely recommend all of them to the sincere seeker. Thank you for listening. This has been your Back Cover Book Report.